So welcome back to our YouTube channel. Now, this might be one of those long videos because we'll look at classes, we'll look at what attributes are, we'll look at what setters are and what getters are. We'll then look at constructors and destructors, then we'll look at other methods. So sit back, lock in, let's get started. So now a class, when you think of variables, what do you think about? For a variable, there are two constraints. Number one, you can only store one value at a time. That problem is solved with arrays, right? The other problem is you can only store one type of data at a time. So with classes, we're trying to solve that constraint. How can we have a container or a variable that allows us to store more than one type of data at a time? That's classes. So think of this as a custom data type. So just like any other data type, you're going to have something like this. You have data type, right? Then you have the name. But in this case, we call this as we have the class here, and we have the object. So before you use the class in main, you have to first declare the class outside. So class, I'll give an example of class student. All right. So look first of all at public classes because there's access modifiers. So I forgot one thing here, access modifiers. So we have public and private, we have protected, but in this video we want to look at public and private. So when a class, if it's public, and by default every class is private, but when a class is public, it means all the attributes can be accessed whether in main or in the class, it can be accessed anywhere, right? So attributes are just characteristics that a class has. A student would always have a name, right? So string name, then we have let's say double marks. How do we create objects in main? We have this. So we're going to have the class. What's our class name? Our class name is student. So we're going to have student, then we can give it any name. Let's say stud1. That's how you create an object. Now, how do you give the object values? You say stud1 dot name. You assign a string, John. Then you say stud1 dot marks. Then I'll assign, let's say 76.5, like that. Now, let me see if this works. I'll just test by saying cout stud1 dot name. It has to print out John for me to know it's working. So now I'll run my program here. So I forgot to close my class. So always make sure your class is closed here. Now let me run the program again. There you go, it gives me John, so it's working. So we have the first part where a class is public and all the attributes, which are these, are being accessed directly in main here or anywhere in the program because they are public. Now let's look at a case where the attributes are private. So when you change this keyword to private, or by default you just leave it like that because every class is private. So you can write private here, or if you want you can just remove this private. These become private. Now when I want to run this program, it won't run because it will tell me to say I'm using the fields that are private. I'm trying to use them in main. It gives me errors, a bunch of errors, right? Because it says Marx is private, is a private member. It says name is a private member because they are private. This means that these attributes or fields cannot be accessed directly in main. So we've got to figure out a way of accessing them indirectly in main, and that is using public methods. And the first set of public methods we're going to look at is getters and setters. So what I'll do is I'll kind of like split the class into two parts. So the first part is a private, second part is public. So I mentioned that if this, by default, a class is private. So if I don't add any access modifier, which means the class is private, but if you want, you can write the keyword private here. It still works like that. So what you've done here is you've split the class into two parts, the private and the public part. So here, I'm going to add public methods. So setters are used to set values, and therefore they are void. And also the order in which we place these methods does not matter. Why? Because C++ runs from top to bottom. So by the time it's reaching in main, it has already compiled every other segment before main. So I'm going to have void set name. Now passing string name. Then I'll say this name is equal to name, like that. So that's one setter. Then I'll have void set marks receives double marks. Then I have this marks equals marks, like that. So another way of writing this line of code is something like this, where you can have double M, then you say marks is equal to M. That's the same thing as this line of code, but I prefer you use the first one, this one. Why? Because it's hard for you to make a mistake where you have the marks here equal to the marks here. The other one, if you just swap the two, if you swap M and A in marks, it becomes wrong. So I'd rather use this one. So for getters, they're going to have a return type. Why? Because they have to return a value they are getting, as opposed to just setting the value. So we're going to have getter for name. I'm going to say string get name. Then receives nothing. Why? Because the name we're going to return is still within the same class. So this getter can still access the name. Then we're going to have double get marks return marks. Now, notice how I've given the names in accordance to what the function or method is doing. Get name, the function is getting a name. Of course, this isn't a default name, but it's just something I'm giving it because of what it is doing. I'll now create objects, the same object here, then I'll assign a value, but in this case, I'm going to assign a value differently. So as opposed to having this dot name, we're going to have dot set name, right? Now, this set name is a function, so which means this equal sign is going to disappear. Then I'm going to pass in these parentheses, which are going to receive the value John. So here, same applies here. I'm going to have set marks. Then this receives a double, like that. So this part is working. Now, how do you print? We're going to use a getter. So I'm going to say stud1 dot get name. Function receives nothing. I'm going to say cout inline, just to give myself some space. And here I can say name yeah, right, like that. And I'm going to copy this line of code and I'll paste it here. Then I'll say marks then dot get marks. Here it said return instead of return. Okay, so I'm going to just spell it correctly. Some other checking. Okay, everything is okay by now. Let me run it again. There you have it, name John, then marks 76.5 as we have done it. So these are one set of public methods. Let's look at constructors and destructors. So a constructor is just a method that is used to define how objects are to be created in the main function. So I'm going to have a constructor that has that is going to initialize both the name and the marks. And by the way, you can have one or more constructors in your class. So if you have, let's say, 5 attributes, you can have a constructor that's going to utilize all the attributes, or 2 of the attributes, or 3 of the attributes, and so on and so forth. You can have more than one constructor, and that term is what we call constructor overloading. Then I'll just copy this line of code. Let me just use it a little bit. So I'll copy it here and I'll paste it here. Then I'll just rename these to student. So a constructor should have the same name as the class. So student string name. Then I'm going to say double marks. Then I'll say, let me just copy this line of code. So this marks is equal to marks. So now we've defined how to create objects in main. So as we create objects, this is the only format we follow as we create objects, as opposed to how we had here, where you can create an object first before assigning a value. It's kind of like reserving space in memory for that object. Here we can't reserve a space. We can only reserve and give value there and then. If you see here, we're just reserving space in this line, then assign values later on. But here we're saying, since we have a constructor now, this becomes illegal. Let me show you when I run this code. It's going to give me an error. That is because we have a constructor that is going to define how objects are to be created. So no matching constructor initialization. So the only way to create objects is to follow this approach. So now what I'll do is I'm going to say student stud1, then I'll pass in the name, which is John. Then I'll pass in 76.5, which is our mark, and I'm going to separate them by a comma because that's how they are defined in the constructor here. So let me just label this. By the way, I'll just say constructor. You know, these guys can see that these are setters. Then these are getters, right? So this is now me assigning the value and creating at the same time. Now you can still have the getters and the setters in the program where we have constructors. It still works because we can still come and use the the setters to set the values, and also the getters to access the values. But we can also have other methods. We're going to create a method called display. So it's going to be a void method. I'll copy here and I'll paste it somewhere here. Then I'll just say void display. Receives nothing but returns a message. So I'll copy this. Just cut it. Then I'll just paste it here. Because the name is accessible in the class, I'll just say name. And since I know that these marks are also accessible in the class, I'll just say marks. Like that. Then to call this display, just the same as we are calling getters and setters. So I'll say stud1 dot display. Should give me the same output as before. So double check again, everything is okay. So this is public here. So this has an error somewhere. So there is one missing. Let me just check. So we have constructor opening from here, closing from here. We have getters, setters from here to here, here to there, then here to there, then here to there, then here. Should close here. Okay, now I've closed. Double check again. Fine, we haven't closed the marks here. Okay, I'll run it now. And it gives me name, John, and marks 76.5. So that is all for this video. Hope you now have an understanding on C++ classes, and I'll see you in the next video.